Have you been in this particular situation before? You went into a store to buy something. You went into a restaurant to have lunch. And then you wanted to pay for it. You put your hand in your pocket and suddenly realized that you'd left your wallet at home. How did it make you feel? That one moment, that exact moment when you realized that you had no access to either your cash or your credit card. For billions of people in the world out there, that single moment you experienced stretches on forever. They have no access to cash, and they have no access to credit. And they're just people like you and me, with the same dreams that you and me have. Let's chase one of that dream and see where it takes us. Imagine for a moment that you woke up today morning with a plan. A plan to start a new business, a plan to buy a new house, a plan to move your daughter to a better school. What was the first thought that came to your mind? Of course, you thought of the big hole in your wallet. And then you thought of where the money will come from. And so you looked at your bank balance. What if you found it wasn't adequate? What would you do next? You'd probably go to your nearest bank and apply for a loan. What would the bank do? They would pull up the details of your account. They would check your credit worthiness. They would ask you for a proof of income. They'd probably ask you for a collateral. And there's a very high chance that by the time you leave the bank, you have your money. What if you didn't have a bank account? What if the nearest bank was 2 days of walking distance away? What if the security guard at the entrance of the bank turned you back because you looked tired and dusty? What if you had no credit record because nobody lent to you? What if you had no proof of source of income because you always earned in cash? What if the doors of formal finance were never open to you? It's hard to imagine that world, isn't it? But it exists. I've been working in financial inclusion for the last 10 years, and it's a reality I find very hard to believe. It's a reality I find very hard to accept. Here's what the data says. 1/3 of the adult population of the world has no access to any source of formal finance. A lot of the financial products and services that you and I take for granted are just not available to them. Let me take you and give you a short glimpse of what that world looks like. It's made of people like you and me. They have families. They have children for whom they have great dreams. They celebrate their birthdays with a lot of pomp. They work very hard. And just like you and me, they have a great sense of pride and dignity. But that's really where the similarities end. When they need a loan, they have no bank to go to. They go to their friends and family. They have no place to put their savings. So they either spend it or they lose it. There is enough evidence to suggest that access to finance has a lot of positive benefits, not only for the excluded world, but for the economy around it. But we are still where we are, with 1/3 of the world having no access to financial products and services. What's stopping us? Now, there's a challenge here. Accessing a financial product involves a commitment that goes beyond a single payment. And assessing that commitment in the absence of data and information is a difficult task. The informal world has no data and information to provide that it is creditworthy. What does this mean? This means that nobody lends to them. And so they don't have a credit history. And they don't have a credit history, and so nobody lends to them. How do we break this logjam? Here's an idea. What if we believed that the informal world was actually creditworthy? We just didn't know how to prove it. What if we found a way to understand this world by being an insider and not an outsider? What if we could step into the shoes of the excluded and see the world the way they saw it? How would we change things? This is exactly what we tried to do in India 10 years ago. I'd like to share this evening with you a few stories that gave us the conviction that the informal world is really beautiful. This is Anandi. She lives in a little village in Orissa. It's one of the poorer states of India. A few years ago, Anandi tried to avail a loan. She took the bus, went to the city, went to the bank, and asked for a loan. Well, of course, they turned her down. She had no bank account. She had no income statement. And of course, she had no credit record because nobody ever lent to her. She came back disappointed and was miserable till a financial institution found her. They discussed her idea with her, and they gave her a $1,000 loan at her doorstep. I heard Anandi's story and decided to go visit her. After walking through slush and mud for an hour, we finally reached a settlement. And there was this little woman standing at the door, warmly welcoming us. We went into the hut. It was a very tiny hut. And through the window of the hut, I saw the pond outside. The pond was the source of Anandi's livelihood. The loan that she was given was used to lease that pond. She'd also use the money to buy fishlings to grow in the pond. 6 months later, she sold the fish in the local market and repaid the loan. What did she do with that money then? She availed a second bigger loan and leased 2 ponds in the same area. A timely loan given to her had transformed Anandi from a helpless housewife into an organic aquaculturist. Another interesting story, and I could go on all night long. I'm going to stop at this one. This is Parmesan. He runs a sandwich stall outside the Bombay Stock Exchange. It's the oldest exchange in India. For years, he has been supplying sandwiches to the entire Bombay Stock Exchange building. I think it's 24 floors. One would imagine that given his captive clientele and the steady cash flow he earns, he probably makes a very attractive opportunity to lend. Well, it so happens that in all the years that he ran his stall there, nobody ever found him worthy to lend to, till a financial institution found him. He had no way to prove his creditworthiness. So the credit officer stood next to him for 2 days in a row and counted the number of sandwiches he delivered every day. Based on this calculation, he created his entire P&L and balance sheet. And based on this computation of his profit and loss statement and his balance sheet, he was given a 2-year loan for $50,000. A 2-year loan. And look at what happened then. A man who had never, ever availed a formal source of finance in his life repaid the loan in 13 months. Now, are these two poor credit? It doesn't seem like. Then what stops people from lending to an Anandi or a Parmesan? What if there were 100 financial institutions that build the capacity to evaluate borrowers like Anandi and Parmesan? How would that world look like? Well, we have some glimpse of that world based on the work we've done in India. India, as you know, is a very large country. We have a population of 1.25 billion across 500 plus districts. Now, that's a very large population. Using a structured finance platform, we have today provided finance to hundreds of such institutions. These institutions specialize in lending to people in the informal world. They have built very creative and innovative ways to evaluate the creditworthiness of borrowers like Anandi and Parmesan. Does this work? Is this scalable? Is this profitable? How far can this go? Well, here are some numbers. Over the last 5 years, we've provided $5 billion of financing for these institutions. Through these institutions, we've lent to 20 million underlying borrowers in the informal space. Not only do we lend to them, we today have a large number of investors who lend to these sectors along with us. Banks, mutual funds, insurance companies, development financial institutions, private wealth investors, and the like. And what the investors find most interesting about this asset class, going beyond their high payment ratio or high repayment ratio, is the fact that these underlying informal sectors are highly resilient to fluctuations in the mainstream Indian economy. What does this mean? It means that a silk weaver in Banaras or a vegetable vendor in the local market is indifferent to what happens to the daily interest rate fluctuations or exchange rate fluctuations. No matter what happens in the formal world, they continue to work. They continue to earn their livelihood, and they continue to repay their loans. It seems that this informal world is far more stable than we give it credit for. So where does this take us? Access to finance is not a magic pill. It will not solve every single problem we have. We've tried one model in India, and it's worked well. There are hundreds of such opportunities to help bring the formal and the informal world together. But if we want to tap those opportunities, there are a few basic assumptions that we must question. Poor does not necessarily mean risky. And informal does not necessarily mean unpromising. That's the lesson we've learned. Years ago, my 5-year-old came running up to me completely distressed, in exasperation. He said, Mom, it's bright daylight out there, and yet I can't see the stars. Sometimes we need to see things differently. Just because we can't see the stars doesn't mean they don't exist. They're all out there waiting to be found. The trick is to stop looking and start seeing. The trick is to see old problems with a new light. And then to take a huge leap that will propel us to a new state of existence.